he'd come up on the train, and he loved to work in the store and meet people. And he thought he might like to do that. He always said if he could make money for somebody else, he could make it for himself. So when he got out of the Navy in '45, he knew that he loved Wilmot, and he knew he wanted to stay. But the store he wanted was the one that is the post office now. It was larger, and it included the post office, which was financial security if you could get the postmastership. There was no guarantee of it, but the owner of the store always got it, and that was enough for him. So in the meantime, we moved for a year, or a little better than a year, to Canaan, and had a little store on Canaan Street. And then we moved back to Wilmot. And when the store became available, Dad bought it and was made postmaster. And he and my mother worked from, well, he got up first. My mother was not an early riser. He was downstairs at 6:30 in the morning to get the mail. Merle Gay from New London was the man who went down to the station in Potter Place, picked up the mail, stopped in Wilmot Flat, or first in Potter Place, then in Wilmot Flat, then in Elkins, and then up in New London. And then he'd do the whole thing in reverse, taking the mail back down to the railroad station in Potter Place. And so he was up early in the morning, and it was kind of funny, or at least it amused me. In the summertime, he and Merle were both baseball fans, and of course the Red Sox were the team even back then. But Merle let his head rule his heart, and he knew that the Red Sox at that time lost more than they won. So when they were betting, he took the opposing team, and my dad always took the Red Sox. And they had 2 stacks of quarters up on the door casing. So Dad had to wait until Merle came with the mail the day after a ball game. And there was a big production where they'd move the quarter or not move the quarter, you know, whatever. Merle counted them, make sure Dad didn't cheat. So anyway, Dad was the postmaster, and my mother, of course, the way the situation was then, there was no such thing as a substitute clerk or postmaster. You were there, whether you were half dead or whether you had to go to the bathroom during the day. So anyway, my mother was unofficially a postal clerk, never got a cent from the government, but probably worked as many hours in the post office as he did, because he had to run, we had no school bus then, so we had to privately drive. And before I got my license, he drove the kids, or a lot of the kids, to school. Some of them had cars. And so that was one of the big differences. The kids today would have a hard time imagining something like that, and the government would not allow it now. Twice a year, they sent an inspector around, a postal inspector, and Dad always said he was a meticulous bookkeeper, so there was never anything, but they had to find something. So they'd look in the stamp drawer. That was the only place that there could be any problems, and if there was 1 or 2 cents off, then they had to write it up, because if they didn't, they weren't doing their job. So anyway, Dad had the store. A lot of the people in this room, either they or their parents, you know, used to stop in a couple times a week, if not every day, when they got the mail and whenever. And Dad sold everything from shoes to hammers to eggs, everything going, including gasoline. Now they call it a mom and pop store. Back then it was just a general store, a country store. And you know, that was about it.
What were the years of operation?
It was from about 1948 to 58. And then he retired. He used to dabble a little bit in, I won't say in real estate because it was on such a small level, but he'd buy a lot, a wood lot, and have it logged off, or he'd buy a piece of land and build, and Raymond Hayes would build a cottage or something on it. And so he did little things, and then he got into, he liked to buy businesses and build them up and sell them. And at one time he had the Market Basket restaurant in New London. He was a part owner of New London Cleaners. And, you know, as he went out, he worked at Crescenti's, and my mom did. But anyway, they spent a lot of years in the store, and we spent a lot of our formative years in the apartment up above. So,
Do you know what your parents' names?
Frank and Alma Cutler.
And your grandfather?
My grandfather was Ernest Smith.
And where did your grandfather have his store?
Probably from 1942 or 3 until 1945.
Do you know who owned it after he did?
After him?
Yeah.
Yes, Ted Courier from Danbury, South Danbury, bought it from him. And before him was Everett Heath, who went from there to Center Harbor. And
Before your grandfather?
Before my grandfather, right.
Yeah.
He had at least one store. I don't know if he had more than that or not, but he went into the supermarket business up in Center Harbor.
Is that the same Everett Heath that was living in Danbury?
No.
No,
That's different?
no, different altogether, yeah.
I just remember going into that store back in the 50s with my grandmother and...
In my grandfather's
Yeah,
store?
and hearing this, I love the sound of the screen door closing.
Yeah.
We'd go there to get candy or something.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Don't jump.
Judy, thank you very much.
Oh,
Would anyone else like to reminisce? We'd love to hear from
I
Betsy.
have a question.
You have a question,
Maybe
Betsy?
somebody has come across, and I can pass this around. I still own my grandparents' property next to the church in Wilmot Center, for those folks that don't know me. But my great-grandfather, and we're related to the Stearns here, was Fred Goodhue. And in Sutton, they did, in the 70s and early 80s, a historic committee went into people's attics and took slides and photographs of everybody's old photos, which was a really great thing for them to have done. And then some of them got reproduced, and I think there are like 2,000 slides somebody showed me. They're going to have to digitize them because they're fading. But the ones that got reproduced are in the little library in Sutton Mills. And in photograph number 136, I was just looking over a few, and it says that it was done in 1900, so it's a little before most of our times. But it shows some men on the bridge in Sutton Mills. I'll pass it around. It's a great, for those of you who know Sutton Mills, it's the little library was a sawmill, but you can see there's a bridge where the Lane River goes through. And then it talks about the people who are in the picture, and then it says, next, gravestones belonging to Mr. Goodhue of Wilmot. Back of the gravestones was a house used by Goodhue. Now, I never, ever heard anybody in my family mention, I think Fred just went down and you can see, here, I'll just start passing it around. You can see the white gravestones. I think he just used it to sell them. But I think, have you come across in any of the diaries or any mention of him using this property? I don't think he owned it. I think he was just utilizing it to sell gravestones. Somebody suggested, I guess Fred did, because he had the hearse, that he probably did service a lot of different towns. But I've never ever heard that he had a business down there as well.
You did say Fred, right?
Yes, it
Yeah.
says good.
So-
Well, yes, but it
but
says
he-
1900, so that's why I think it's Fred.
And he did take over his father, Seth Goodhue's business.
And Seth was an undertaker also, right?
And he did sell gravestones, so you're right, it might have been
Just
just
a little branch store.
gravestone. Right.
Anyway, I was very surprised, because here I am now in the same little town.
And he
I just
sold a
don't-
lot of these metal gravestones. They're not stones, they're metal monuments.
Yes.
Yeah. and there's several.
Like up in the
Yeah,
cemetery,
the
his, the
Goodhues are
Goodhue
there,
one,
yeah.
okay, thank you, oh, good. But if anyone ever comes across any mention, I'd just love to know about it. Thank you.
A branch office.
The gravestone mystery of Sutton Mills. Yeah, circumstantial evidence does point to Fred Goodhue expanding his business into the neighboring towns there. So, but if anyone hears a story about such a thing in Sutton Mills, please let us know. Would anyone else like to contribute? Shall we go ahead then?
Yes.
All right. I have the privilege of introducing Jack John McAuliffe. Jack is one of the most enjoyable people I've met from the older Wilmot. Jack lived here from 1930 until he went into the Navy. Marines. So he went into the Marines. Okay. Well, and Jack has been quite a celebrity with Wilmot Historical Society lately. Several people have been over to interview him in Guilford, and I think the ladies in particular enjoy talking with Jack. Not only is he very clear-headed, but his eyes have a certain twinkle to them.
They like to feed me.
I'm going to pass around a picture. This is one of the best pictures showing the North Wilmot Church and the farm that Jack McAuliffe lived on in the 30s. This picture was taken exactly 100 years ago. It's looking up toward Tewksbury Hill, and so that you see first the church and then you see Tewksbury Hill out behind it, and Jack's farm is in the distance, halfway up the hill. Now I'm going to pass it around here so you can get a perspective, just to see what the land looked like 100 years ago. Jack doesn't claim to remember that quite, but he does go back a bit. So just quickly pass it around.
It's taken from our front yard, basically.
Yeah. So Jack has not lived in Wilmot for some time, but I think he has a soft spot for Wilmot in his heart, because he has been back over here many times at Old Home Day, and I've run into him when he's cutting wood on his land. Even though the family has not lived here for decades and decades, Jack still owns a large part of the original farm. The farm began probably by 1815. Jabez Morrill lived on the property. He sold to Henry Tewksbury. This was the original Tewksbury farm, not the house at the top of the hill, but the one most of the way down the hill, which is unfortunately now gone. And Jack can tell us more about that. But it was the Henry Tewksbury house, the Stephen Tewksbury house, the George Tewksbury house, and then shortly after 1900, several other owners had it for a time. Ed Kimball owned the farm from 1914 to his death in 1920, and then the McAuliffe family, I believe, bought the farm in 1930.
30, yeah, from
30.
Goswell.
Okay, and let's welcome Jack here. Jack.
Thank you for your warm up. I'm always happy to come to
Who wants to be
Wilmot.
up?
Seems though I always get a welcome here, you know? And over the years, I've become acquainted with quite a few people. I knew quite a few in the past, and I've seen them grow up. I've seen them grow old, along with me. Fred has brought a couple of pictures here that are very interesting to me,
I can get that.
depicting
Show
the
the pictures.
main farm buildings.
It'd be Urbana White.
Those are the buildings that we lost in the fire in 1935. There are some interesting details there that some of you may not be aware of. There's a little bit of a roof line showing right there that's not concurrent with the woodshed. And if you look carefully right on the left-hand side of the main house, you see that the shingles are a little bit different. They were the old-fashioned shaved shingles that were made by hand rather than in a sawmill. And so they were much older. And in thinking about the layout of the house inside, there are some areas in there that were kind of mixed up. And the only deduction that I can come up with, or answer that I can come up with, is that these details are the result of building one house around another. And I think the original house was probably built probably by the original Tewksbury back in the early 1800s after he had bought the property from Jabez Morrow. But apparently he wasn't satisfied with it, it wasn't big enough. And around the back of the barn, you can just see a little corner peeking out, which is what we call the old barn. There was another barn down below the large barn and setting off towards the back road there. And it was in pretty bad repair when we bought the property. But apparently it was part of the original buildings. And I suspect that that barn was probably up somewhere where the woodshed is now, in this picture. And it was probably moved in order to make room for the new building. Another thing that happened was that when this house was built, they redid the foundation. The granite stone was split and mined in a quarry over near your place. Somewhere up on the side hill there's an old quarry, and that was where they got the stone. In the bottom course of stones in the east wall of the foundation, there are three circles, three circular cutouts in the stones. Those are the holes where the shaft went down through a millstone. One of these stones were originally millstones in the grist mill at the foot of the hill. And apparently when they got around to build this set of buildings, they needed some stone, and Tewksbury went down and he split those millstones in two. So he had 4 halves. He laid 3 halves in the first course of stone in the back wall of the foundation. The last half was used as a foundation stone for this first chimney in the main house. When the buildings burned, it sat there on top of the ground, the chimney had fallen over, a pile of bricks around it, and the millstone was sitting there on top of the ground beside the cellar. My dad took the stone and moved it over to the little building that we built to live in, a little 2-room house, after the fire, across the road on the east side of Tewksbury Road. And he put a little course of bricks around it because it wasn't quite large enough for him. And so it made a nice doorstep. And also, in the corner of the porch here were a set of granite steps. They were cut granite stone, or I think there were 6 or 7 of them. Very nice granite. And apparently they had been purchased from some quarry somewhere. I don't think they were mined over in North Wilmot. But during the war, those stones developed legs. They walked off. Where they went, I don't know. The three stones in the bottom of the cellar are still there. It's gonna take a crane to take the wall down and get them out. Other than that, they would be gone probably also. The back room in the main house had no windows in it. My father always referred to it as the boarding room. He said that was where all of the children that were born in that house were probably born, because it was enclosed on four walls, no windows, no light. It was quiet, and it was a great place for little babies to be born. So, I never disputed it, and nobody else did either. So I guess that's probably what it was. You folks have any questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Jack, would you tell us about going to school and which schools you went to, who the teachers were?
To start with, I went to the first grade in the White Pond School, Langley School.
Excuse me, Jack, I need to get you on a microphone.
Okay, the White Pond School.
Yeah,
Which is,
Annie Thompson, or Annie Whittemore, was my first grade teacher. She was the first year out of teachers' normal school. And she had all 8 grades. We had, I think it was around 13 or 14 people, children in the school. How she did it, I don't know. But she had things very well organized. She would set one grade to doing one task and another grade to doing something else. Somebody else practicing handwriting, someone else writing spelling or writing little essays. And she'd have a reading class in the first or the second grade, and she'd have spelling with somebody else, all at the same time. And so you sat there through 8 grades. By the time you got to the 8th grade, you knew the first, the second, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth very well.
Yes.
You had repetition and so forth, so I think there were quite a lot of benefits to the one-room school. And I had never felt as though I was shortened in my education by getting educated in a one-room school, all 8th grades.
And you know that Annie's 2 children are sitting in this room.
Comment, please?
Annie's 2 children are in this room. Annie Thompson's 2 children are in this room right now.
Oh, good for them.
Show yourself.
Good. Glad you
Elizabeth and
came.
Charles.
Transportation to school was kind of a questionable thing. If you lived 2 miles or more from the school, you were entitled to paid transportation by the town. If you were less than 2 miles, you were supposed to walk. Well, there was a McAuliffe family that lived up by the pond. They were 2 miles. Pete McAuliffe had the school bus contract, and he had an old 26 Dodge touring car. And it was a pretty good car. It always started in the wintertime. It had a 12-volt system, which was rare in those days. And so out of the kindness of his heart, he used to pick me up on the way by. So I had a free ride to school. My father had the contract for a while, and he used to carry the kids to school, including the McAuliffes, the Hills, and me. And so he had a wagon that he had bought from Herbert Morrow up in Fowlertown. This wagon had 3 seats in it, and it had the added advantage that there were 2 sleds that came with it. And in the winter, you could take the wheels off, and there were sockets in the sleds where the axles for the wheels set right into the sleds. So he used to have a team of horses hooked onto it, and he had some canvas, he built a frame, and framed over the top of the wagon so it was all enclosed, nice and cozy inside. And that was the school bus. And so, pair of horses and a wagon full of kids, namely a sled, that was how we went to school.
Wow.
And it worked out very well. Some of the kids used to come with a little hot water bottle. Some of them came with a hot stone, soap stone wrapped up in a blanket,
Yeah.
and they keep their feet warm. And
Yeah.
there were various ways to keep it from freezing, but as long as it was closed in, the wind didn't bother you, you were okay. Then I was telling somebody here, Ed Collins, who was a boarder at Clarion Langley, he got a school bus contract one year. Well, the car he had was a little Whippet Roadster. Had a rumble seat, was open in the front, had side curtains on it. And to take 5 or 6 hill kids, myself and some of the others up there, MacArthur's, stuff us all into that Whippet Roadster was a little bit much. So someone in the school board heard about it, and they came up and they said, Ed, you've got to have another car. You've got to have a larger automobile if you're going to carry all these kids. Okay. So we went down and he bought, I think it was a 26 or 27 or 8 Dodge 4-door sedan, which was a good sized car, so us kids could all get in and be close in. So that was what we had for school bus there. Howard Atwood was school bus driver for some time. His grandson is here today. Yeah. And used to ride with him sometimes. Remember first he had a 29 Chevrolet 2-door sedan. Then later on he traded that for a bright red 2-door Chevrolet Master Deluxe sedan. Had knee action in it. If you know what knee action was, it was a hydraulic spring affair that was on the front of the car that acted as the front suspension. And the valves in them would get kind of loose after a while. The things would bounce up and down. She went over the road. I remember come mud time, road started getting soft and muddy. We came through one place that was pretty bad. And Howard said, well, he said, this isn't going to make it tomorrow morning. He says, I got to get something different. I'm going to get a Model T. The next morning, Howard showed up with a Model T. He had a Model T touring car, and it had a 2-speed Bruxto rear end in it. So he had the advantage of the extra gear. And of course, they had great high wheels on it. You could wallow through quite a lot of mud and still make it. So that was how we got back and forth during mud time at school.
Now, you had real mud seasons
We
back
had
then.
mud season, yeah.
So do we.
What was it they said, 3 months of winter, 2 weeks of mud season, and 2 weeks of sloppy sledding.
Sloppy sledding.
Now, you went to the North Road School also, along with the White Pond
yeah.
School, right?
1937, yeah, 1937 it was, I guess. We went to Baltimore, Maryland to live for a short while. My father had a job down there. This was Depression years, jobs are hard to get. And he happened to get one there, so we went down, we moved. We were there for, probably a month. The job played out, and we were stranded. Well, we came back, and was awful glad to get back to the old house.
Yeah.
And back home. Well, at that point, I went to the North Road School. Marjorie Pinard was the teacher. She was fresh out of grammar school. I mean, normal school, I'm sorry.
Right.
And,
Did she marry David Armstrong?
yes, she did.
Okay,
Yeah,
I remember.
that was a little later. She had a brand new 36 Chevrolet. No, it was pretty new. And then she taught for 1 year. Then I had a teacher, her name was Bernice Follansby. She came from New Boston. She got married during the year to a guy by the name of Oman, O-M-A-N-D. So she was Miss Oman the last 2 or 3 months at school. And then the next year, she didn't come back. We had a new teacher, and she was the lady who married Amos Johnson down here. And,
Amos Johnson, wow.
huh?
That's good.
I'm trying to think of her name. Sometimes
Jack,
Huh?
Lorna Tibbetts. Lorna,
Lorna
Tibbetts.
Tibbetts. Good, thank you. Okay, somebody's got a memory back there.
Good, that's good.
Now, I don't know whether Lorna is still around or not.
She died about 4 or 5 years ago.
Huh?
She died 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh, she did? Oh, that's too bad. Well, she was a good teacher. Yeah. Now, the garnet mill was in operation when I was in school up there. It was at low production. There were only 2 or 3 men working there. There were 2 Harolds, Harold Danforth, and there was another Harold, Fanny Langley's across from Walker. And then there was another man that worked in there. And what they did was they would mine garnet up the quarry, and they'd send it down and they put it in the grinder in the mill, and they grind it all up. So they'd have this huge bin full of stock. And out of that stock, they used to operate the separators and the graders and so forth, and they used to make up orders for garnet in little bags, like cement bags.
Now,
And
that was right near the North Road School.
that was just right, yeah, it was
Yeah,
as far as that door is from us.
yeah, you could
You
hear.
could hear the thing rattling and
Yeah,
shaking
you
all
could
the
hear it
time.
all.
And Willard Ford used to come up with his truck once a week, and he would load up a load of those bags, take them down to the railroad station, and they went off to wherever they were going. And I think Norton Abrasive was one of the customers, and there was some place in Germany where they used to send an order every once in a while, polished glass, real fine stuff. And sometimes, going to the North Road School, I was not entitled to transportation. I was just outside. So I used to shortcut quite often. I'd walk up by Mrs. Kimball's cabins, keep on going out through the woods, down past the granite quarry, down over the hills to the school.
Oh, my God.
And that would cut about a half a mile off the walk going way up around my
Oh,
house.
yeah. Yeah.
So that was one of the ways that I got to school.
Were you ever tempted to go swimming in the pit?
No. No, I never figured out how I was going to get out. It was a big, if I remember, I think there's a big cut in one on the south side, south wall. But if the water was low, you couldn't get up to the top of that darn thing.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
No, I used to keep my distance walking around by it, you know. There was all kinds of little granite and chunks of wood, rock and so forth, all over the ground up there. Some were pretty good size. You ever been up?
Yes, I have.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm sure you probably have.
Yeah, it was frightening just to look down into the.
Oh, yeah, that thing is deep.
It's
Quite deep.
private property. Don't go there. It's
Yeah.
dangerous.
Yeah, the owner does not like visitors in there.
Oh, I'm sure they don't, yeah.
No.
But I was just a passing through in a hurry. So,
There's a question, Jack. Oh, Jack,
yes,
Jack, tell us about how they used to plow the road, because it was a little on the steep side in a couple of places.
well, when we first came to Wilmot, they had an old wooden plow made out of planks, and it was hauled by horses. They just put 4 teams of horses on the front of it, and they'd haul this thing around the roads, and it would push the snow aside. And the horses would wallow in the snowdrifts. Well, there was an improvement figured on that. John Stearns worked all one summer building a snowplow. It had wings on it, had a nose that went up and down, it rode on a couple of shoes, and so it still hooked horses onto it, on the front of it. So you had to have a team of men going around with hand shovels. So when the horses got mired down, you had to shovel them out. so you could haul the plow through. Well, that went on for only 2 years, and they decided at town meeting that it was time that the town bought a piece of real snow removal equipment. So they bought a cleat-track tractor and a sergeant plow. I can remember my father chirping about the money that they spent. He said, they spent $5,000 for that tractor. And he said they spent $3,000 for the plow. That's $8,000. That's a lot of money.
Yes.
And so where the old townhouse used to be was a vacant lot. They built a tractor shed there.
Wilmot Center.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
Wilmot Center. And my dad was hired to paint the building. And it was a brand new building. I used to go down with him sometime. And they had a nice tractor shed there. What happened to it?
It was
It's a vacant,
torn down, or
it's a vacant lot now.
Tractor shed's up where the old town shed is now, up on off 4A. The original, well, the
Oh.
shed they built to put the tractor in is up there next to the
Oh,
other
they moved it.
town garage that they built before they
Oh,
moved
I
into the
see,
new one.
yeah. That's-
57 years ago, I
Yeah.
got paid 75 cents an hour to run a wing on the back of that baby.
They started out with I think it was a 5-man crew. There was the driver and his helper. I don't know, they figured he was gonna go to sleep or what, but then on the back, you had the left wingman, the right wingman, and the nose man. And they each had a little crank to crank, so they could bring it up and down. And, well, that only lasted about 3 trips. And they got the crew back to the driver and the helper and a man in the back. And the helper and the man in the back used to swap off, so as to keep warm. And then, of course, when you came to a house, you stopped, you were invited in for a cup of coffee. Sometimes the coffee was laced a little. Sometimes the path of the tractor wasn't too straight going down the road. Then there were times when they would lose the clutch out of the tractor up on the mountain. And we'd sit up in North Wilmot for a week while they fixed it.
Yeah.
With no roads, so those were the days.
Jack, is it true that they couldn't plow up your hill, and so they had to go around
That's true,
through the marsh?
yeah.
Is
That's
that right?
what we call the back road.
Yeah.
It starts up at where Hatter Hill Road takes off from Piper Pond Road. Comes the other way, and it came up between our barn and our corn crib, up to what we call the back road. So what they used to do, of course they were plowing up to Piper Pond at that time, up to McAuliffe's. And so they plow up there, and on the way back, they'd come back up our back road and plow the back road, come up from the house, go down the hill, so they were plowing downhill, so they didn't have to plow up that steep hill. But they, of course, they didn't go up Tewksbury's. And so that was how that was done.
Yep.
But sometimes it would take about 4 days to get the roads cleaned out, you know. Question back then.
Were there any people in Fowlertown when you were?
No,
It was done by then?
no, the Fowlertown was vacant when I lived there. It hadn't been vacant too long, I don't believe. Caroline LaJoy lived up there when she was a young girl. Her mother and father lived down in Wilmot Center. They had bought a house down there, right directly across from North Wilmot Road. See the old Cape Cod house? Esther Grace lived there for some time. That was her grandmother's house. When I worked for Paul Gay, the last time, I stayed at Lillian Fowler's house. And Lillian boarded and roomed and did my washing for $7 a week. I remember the little spring alongside the kitchen sink. There was a big wooden box there. There's a well up on the hill towards the cemetery somewhere. And there's a lead pipe that comes down, comes into the cellar, comes up to the bottom of that box, with a little pinhole in it. There's always a current of water there. That was nice, ice cold water. Sir?
Even in my lifetime, she was the postmistress in Wilmot Center for a while, Lillian LaJoy. And I remember that spring in her kitchen when we'd go to get the mail.
Oh, yeah.
And, I remember that also.
How far up the hill is it? I never saw it.
The water?
Yeah.
Yeah, I never saw where it came from. I just saw it inside her
Yeah.
house, like you saw.
Must be a nice spring, because it
Yes,
used to
it's,
go the year round. It was ice
it
cold.
was. It was very. I was always impressed by that. Yes.
Jack, do you have memories of the hurricane? 38?
A little bit. When the hurricane came, we really were not aware of it. Our little house there sat on the westerly side of the hill. The wind came from the east. And it was, you know, hurricane weather. The temperature was pretty high. Humidity was high. And I can remember eating supper, and we had the kitchen door open, just a screen door. And I can remember my dad saying, there seems to be quite a lot of wind blowing over the top of the house. That was the only comment that was made.
Yeah.
So the next morning I got up and I had a bicycle. I was going to ride my bicycle over to school. So I climbed on the bike, went down to church and started heading down towards Fran Langley's. I got halfway down there and a tree across the road. Well, that happens. So I went out in the woods with the bike and led it around, got back in the road, and I went a little further, started down over the hill. There were about 4 or 5 trees in the road. Boy, it's a mess. So I parked the bike and I wallowed through the trees, got on the other side, and there were more trees down. I said, this is too much for me. So I turned around, I went back, and I told my father, I said, Dad, I can't go to school today. I said, the road is full of trees. There's been some sort of a real wind out here. And he said, there has? So then after that, we started walking around, and we saw evidence of hurricane in a lot of places. It was serious.
Yeah. So it went right over the top of...
Went right over the top of our little place, yeah. So it never affected it, yeah. And it would hit in patches in the woods. There'd be areas in the woods where there'd be a whole bunch of trees that would cover maybe 150, 200 feet in diameter down. Everything else around would be standing. The trees would be kind of twisted around and so forth. It was very spotty, yeah. So.
Yeah, those mid-30s were some tough economic times with the Depression going on. And I'm curious if you have any memories of what people did to get by compared with earlier or later times here in Wilmot.
You talk about
The Depression and
getting a living?
yeah, getting a living, getting jobs, getting food.
Well, it was kind of spotty. You get a job wherever you could, and it might last, a few days, might last a few weeks, or you never do. The going wage, I can remember shoveling gravel in a pit down the back of our place, belonging to John Stearns, and I got 30 cents an hour working for the town. And we were shoveling gravel with a long-handled shovel into a dump cart, hauled by horses. And used to haul it. Gravel was actually sand. Hauled it out on the roads and spread it, and that would keep the mud from coming through in the spring. It helped a lot. I worked quite a few different places. Tyler Grace, that's Tyler's father, had a masonry business, and he used to build retaining walls around the lake, on Pleasant Lake in Elkin for cottages, and do stonework, that sort of thing. And Roland Grace was a good friend of mine, and we both had jobs with him in the fall, and we used to work for Tyler building these mortar rubble masonry walls, we called them, out of stones and cement. And I know when it started getting cold weather, Tyler would come down with a bag of calcium chloride. And we'd be mixing cement, and he'd throw a few handfuls of calcium in it. I said, "Calcium, what's going to happen with that stuff?" Well, he said, "It won't freeze quite so quick, and you can get the rocks in place." And he said, "When it does set," he says, it won't thaw out till spring." So that was one way we did things.
But now I understand that your father was a painter, and as an artistic painter.
Yes, he was.
Now
That was that's how we got our living. So it's the last of it. The federal government, they had all kinds of programs. And they had an art program, believe it or not. And there was a man in charge by the name of Omar Lasan. He had a big colonial house down in Boscline. And my father heard about it. And he was an artist. He had been to art school in Los Angeles before he left California. And so he used to do quite a lot of painting. And he did oil colors, he did watercolors, and he did pastels. And so he went down and saw this Mr. Lasan. And Mr. Lasan said, "Yep." He said, "We'll set you up. We will furnish the material. And whatever you want, either oil or pastels or whatever. And the boards, canvas, frames, and that sort of thing. And you can paint. You're expected to produce, I don't know, I can't remember the number of paintings per month that he was supposed to produce, but there was a given number, a lower limit. And it depended somewhat upon the size. So Dad put up a little studio outside of the house, made out of little logs. You may have seen when you first moved there.
yes, I
It's
saw
across the road.
little log houses.
Yeah, and it had a north-facing window, so it had pretty good light for artwork. And he had a little cast iron stove out there, and he'd go out there and heat that thing up, and he would paint out there. And he used to send probably 4 or 5 pictures every month down the Boscline to Mr. Lasan. And those pictures were taken and they were put into various public buildings all over the country. Now, my brother Tom ran into one in the library down in Durham. He tried very hard to buy it, but he couldn't do it. They wouldn't let it go. But I have one in my living room, which is a picture taken from 4A, facing up North Wilmot Road, which shows the town hall, the schoolhouse, and church. And that's a nice one.
Okay, that would show the old church up on the hill?
No, it doesn't.
No,
No,
no, okay.
no, it doesn't show it. The angle is such that it's not in it. And my daughter has one of a sapping operation that was done over Fred LaJoy's when my dad was over there, he drew the sketch for it. It shows a gathering tank and a pair of oxen and trees and so forth. Sap house with the steam coming out, so forth. And my brother has a very large one of that, about the size, maybe taller than that one that's hanging on the wall over there. And my mother, after my father passed on, had a bunch of his paintings. And my youngest brother kind of liked them. He'd come up from Mississippi, and every time he went back, he always took 4 or 5 back with him. I had occasion to go down there and visit one time in his house, and he had a long hallway. The hallway was lined with my father's paintings. The hurricane that they had down there, when was it, about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago? More than that.
Katrina?
The big one.
Katrina.
Yeah. Well, it took that house out because it was too close to the Gulf of Mexico. And it was a split level. It was a long house. And flattened the whole thing. So paintings and all were gone. So that was my father's, one of the means that he used to get by the Depression. We also kept chickens.
Jack, I'm getting nervous about you being up here all this long time, and everybody else may need a little refreshment break. Shall we take a little break? Is everybody in favor? I'm gonna let Jack show you what he wants to show you here.
It's the other picture.
Oh, is it this side?
No, but
I passed one
Oh,
other
it's
picture
coming around.
around.
Jack, how do you feel about taking a little break?
It's okay.
Is that good? Okay.
The other picture, if you look way to the right,
Please,
there's a
folks,
little bit of a building.
feel free to enjoy the refreshments.
yes, that's it. That's the one she wants.
That building was down on the back road. And it was a,
There you go.
yeah. Right over the roof of the church. That was known as our blacksmith shop. That's what it was originally. It was used as temporary quarters when the house burned. And then later on, my folks obtained a bunch of chickens, and they had a little over 300 chickens.
Oh,
And we used to ship eggs on the trains out of South Danbury
Yeah.
by crate to the dairy egg auction. So every week, a crate full of eggs, 30 dozen went down to the dairy egg auction, and that helped get us through the Depression.
Yeah, good.
Where was this train in South Danbury?
The train was, you know where the underpass is?
Yeah.
right there.
Just south of the underpass, there was a little station there called Converse.
There's still a sign there, I think.
Yeah?
But it was.
And the next, do you know what the next one was? Yale. Yale, yeah.
Okay, there was
Then there was Andover. What was the one in East Andover?
Halcyon.
Halcyon. How'd you know?
I like the railroad.
Those strange names for stations came about as a result of a train wreck. There was a head-on collision between two trains this side of Andover Station. And the story was that the telegraph operator was told to stop the train. It was headed south at such and such a station up here, but they got the names mixed up somehow or other. And with West Andover and Park Place and Andover and so forth. So the trains came together down there head on. And it was pretty drastic. This was back in the 1800s. So as a result, the Boston and Maine Railroad, Concord, Montreal, whoever it was, decided they better rename their stations, get rid of these similar names that were on these lines. So each little village got its own name. Some of them are pretty strange. They're not related at all to the village itself. But that's how you got Congress, how you got Gale. I don't know what Gale is. Halcyon, I don't know, that's, no, I don't know what that is either. Okay?
Jack, do you know about the train crash that our father missed? The one, it would have been in the thirties, late 30s.
What about,
Would you like to be able to hear her better?
yeah,
Okay, well, let me trick you. In fact, why don't you come on over to the chair? Why don't you sit nicely here, and we'll come to you. How's that? And then everybody else, and I'll get you a little refreshment, and everybody else will do. I bet that's a welcome spot.
it is.
Okay.
I'm wondering if you have any of the details about the train crash in the late 30s. Our father was working for somebody. Our father, Guy Stearns, Beckley Stearns, was working. And you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Caroline is referring to a train accident that her father was close to back in around 1940, 41, I would say. Her father, Beckley, was a good friend of mine, and we were both working at the time for the same company in different places. The REA lines were being